Serious, what's the creepiest, scariest thing you've seen but no one believes you? Fishing on Lake Minnewanka in Banff National Park with a good friend. About 50 feet from shore. Around 8:30 p.m. I see glowing red eyes. Up in the trees. Like red. Like Predator, I guess. I do a double take. They're gone. I decide not to say anything, maybe I'm trippin'. Did just smoke up? Nope. 5 minutes later my buddy says, I just seen some glowing red eyes up in the top of those trees. I feel goosebumps. Yup, I saw them too. We look back and they're gone. We decide to aim the boat towards the shoreline. It's not dark yet but sun is going down. We saw nothing. No owls, no goats in the trails. We didn't get off the boat but we had a good look around. When I ask him about it, this was around 10 years ago, he just says he doesn't want to talk about it. I can't blame him. But after all these years I've never heard or seen anything like those glowing red eyes, 30 to 40 feet up in the trees, staring at us. I copied and pasted this next part. I knew nothing about the history when we went fishing there. For more than 100 centuries, people hunted and camped along the original shores of Lake Minnewanka. The Stony people called it Minwaki, or Lake of the Spirits. They respected and feared this lake for its resident spirits. The early Europeans called it Devil's Lake. I used to go camping there. I do not anymore. Mostly because it's bare country for most of the summer. But yeah, also because of those bright red eyes. I will never forget that. Most surreal thing I've ever seen. I spent one summer in high school living with my aunt and uncle and keeping the 7-year-old daughter for them during the day while they worked. I was up late one night watching TV in the living room. The living room was right off of the kitchen, separated only by an L-shaped bar. I saw my cousin out of the corner of my eye walk down the hallway from her room into the kitchen. It was way past her bedtime, so I told her she needed to go back to bed. When I didn't hear her answer, I got up and walked around the bar and into the kitchen. There was no one there. I checked under the bar to see if she was hiding from me, and there was no one there, and nowhere else she could have gone from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway to her room, and she was fast asleep, snoring, so there was no way it was her. It baffled me and freaked me out, because if I didn't see my cousin, who was the little girl that walked into the kitchen. Several years later, I was talking to my aunt and she nonchalantly brings up the ghost in her house. I laughed it off and she said, "No, I'm serious. We have a ghost. Your uncle and I both have seen her and heard her. We call her Giggles, because we hear her giggling. We usually only see her in the hallway before she disappears." All of a sudden, I remembered the disappearing girl in the kitchen. I asked her what her ghost looked like. She said she had blonde hair with braids and wore a white dress. My cousin is blonde. On the night in question, I thought I'd seen my cousin in a nightgown walk down the hallway, but apparently it was the ghost that resides in my aunt's house. Not quite sure how young I was at the time, but it was probably between 5 and 8. I was in my babysitter bed at the time in her trailer park. It was 3 a.m. I had woken up because I had to pee. When I woke up, I looked down the hallway to see my babysitter leaning against the wall like one of the stereotypical cool guys do in movies. And I made eye contact and I felt my body go cold because she was still sound asleep next to me in bed. I went under the blankets trying to hide, and when I looked back she was gone. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I've never told anyone. I just sat in her bed watching infomercials until 6 a.m. when she woke up. Never even thought about sleeping there again. I honestly forget how much this affected me until I started writing this. Really freaked me out, man. Edit, since I never told anyone IDK if it belongs here, but no one in my family believes in ghosts, so if I were to tell them, I guarantee it'd be dismissed. If this is related, I've dealt with sleep paralysis in high school, where I'd have a tall shadow man slowly approach me with malicious intent so powerful I could feel it and I couldn't move. That might be worst, but I was able to figure out what it was. For those suggesting that you shoot it since it's a good gateway lucid dreaming, it does not work. I dealt with it every single night throughout sophomore year and I couldn't move even the slightest. It struck me with such great fear, even though I expected it. I had to try wiggle anything. Usually a finger or my eyelid would move a little right as he was going to grab me. Each time I successfully wiggled, I woke up. I've had that same shadow man experience the majority of my life. It's one of my very first memories, in fact. When I see him, he's tall and always has a hat on, however he's so tall I can never tell where it ends. Now I sleep face down to make sure I don't see him. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night. Uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going in to work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the AM. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 cause lights I'd had. No known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened to that time. I have a similar story but much smaller. My husband lives around a 5-minute walk from the shop I used to work in, literally down the road and a left turn into the high street. I was due in at 6 AM, so my phone alarm went at around 5:15, so I got up, got myself ready etc. and headed out the door at around 5:45 as usual. Just as I hit the left turn, I get a phone call from my manager demanding to know where I was, as it was 28 in the morning and they had to open on their own. I have no explanation of how a 5-minute journey on foot turned into nearly 2 hours. As far as I was concerned, I was just walking down the road. I even checked the date to make sure the clocks hadn't gone back forward overnight. Also, being that close to the high street, if I had passed out or something, then I'm sure somebody would have found me. I have no idea what happened, and of course nobody at work believed me and just thought I'd left my house late and not called in. I drove from my house to work, a straight line on a 2-lane street, and had this happen. The seizure stroke explanation would be more comfortable to me, as it's at least a normal experience, but I don't know how I could have had 4 hours vanish without someone noticing me blocking the road. That's amazing. I have a similar but much milder story from when I was maybe 8. I was standing by the window in my bedroom watching the sky get darker before bed. Then before it got properly dark it got lighter and lighter instead, and it was the next day. I really don't think I slept a full night standing upright at my bedroom window, and the transition from evening to morning was seamless. I had a similar, though smaller scale thing happen when I was around 11. I'd cut myself while I was playing outside, and I was watching the blood ooze out. Weird kid, I know, when it just suddenly started congealing and solidified in what seemed to be seconds. It wasn't super bright outside, I think it was overcast, actually, and it's always super weird to remember it.